Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 208, Mrs. Fleming, Part 1. Elizabeth Fleming died around suspicious circumstances. It was described by police initially as a baffling case. On the 28th of June 1951, Tom and Betty Fleming made a car trip from their New South Wales cattle stud, Mount Parry Station, to Quirindi for business and shopping. It was a busy day for Mrs. Fleming. She called at the chemist, buying toothbrushes for her children and a new lipstick. Elsewhere, she purchased material for a dress to be made for her young daughter Jennifer and ordered a garment for herself, which she intended collecting next time she was in town. She also had a brief pre-arranged catch-up with her widowed mother, Florence Mackay, known as Ruby, who was en route by train from Armidale to her home at Aberdeen. Mrs. Mackay had some exciting news. She said she was buying a new house and looking forward to Betty and the children being her first guests. There was another thing Mrs. Fleming did that day. She called at her solicitor's to make a will, perhaps because she was due to inherit a share of a property from her late father, who died in 1946. She mentioned leaving a sum to her husband, who was named as executor, but the solicitor suggested that as Tom was a very wealthy man, it would be best to leave him a token amount only, with the residue going to her children. This would avoid a heavy probate. When she called back later that day, the solicitor hadn't had time to prepare the document. This didn't seem to concern her, and it was arranged that she'd make an appointment and sign it in a week or so. The Flemings met up for afternoon tea and bought chocolates for the journey home. They stopped at Willow Tree on the way. According to Tom Fleming, his wife complained of a headache. He bought drinks at the local hotel, a rum and lemonade for himself and a beer for Betty, which he took out to the car. This was something he often did. It was another 31 miles to Mount Parry Station from Willow Tree. Tom Fleming would later say that when he stopped to open the boundary gate, he was shocked to discover that his wife was deceased in the seat beside him, with 3-year-old Jennifer presumably asleep on her lap. He drove to the homestead and called Dr. Bryce Cooper of Quirindi, who arrived with Sergeant Lambert. Dr. Cooper was Mrs. Fleming's GP, and as far as he was aware, she had been in perfect health. Betty Fleming was one of 3 girls born to George John Mackay and Florence Ruby MacDonald. George's father had emigrated from Scotland in the 1870s. George and Florence married in Armidale in 1910, and Betty was a twin with Joan, who were born on the family property, Kentucky Station at Urella, on the 21st of November 1911. Another sister, Nancy, was born in 1916. Nancy married Tom Fleming's brother Joseph. Thomas Langhorne Fleming was born on the 14th of September 1908 at Russley, Aberdeen, New South Wales, to Thomas Hasty Fleming and Naomi Marion Fulton Langhorne. Thomas's grandfather, John King Fleming, was Scottish and had emigrated to Victoria in 1858 and married Helen Hasty in April 1866. In the Scone Advocate on the 2nd of May 1916, it has the obituary of John King Fleming, so Thomas's grandfather. The late Mr. J.K. Fleming. The passing away of Mr. John King Fleming of Kelvinside on Friday morning at the age of 79 years leaves our district the poorer of one of its finest personalities, a philanthropic and public-spirited citizen. He was the son of the late John Park Fleming, a well-known Scottish writer and solicitor, and part owner of the Kelvinside estate in Glasgow, shares in which property the family retained right up until 1895. The deceased came to Australia when he was 20, being a fellow passenger and companion on the vessel, in which Mr. James Richard of the favourably known Haddon Rig Station also came to Australia. He settled in Victoria for a number of years, where straight away he followed pastoral pursuits, acquiring the rich Avon property. In the early 1880s, he crossed the border to New South Wales and, after managing the Eular property for a short time, took possession of it in 1886. It was in the 1890s that he purchased Wayland and Kelvinside, and about 20 years ago he first set foot in this district, where he had resided ever since in his fine home, being portion of the old Seagenhoe estate. It was not long after his advent to these parts that his sterling qualities manifested themselves, and although living in a life of retirement, his kindly and generous disposition kept him in a high position in all affairs which had the welfare of the district or country as their object. Unostentatious in the majority of his givings, many of his charitable and kindly actions went down unrecorded. The wrench of losing his devoted partner in life in 1913 was a great one for the deceased gentleman. Mrs. Fleming, like her husband, was a staunch supporter of her church, being the daughter of Reverend F. Hasty, a Presbyterian of Buninyong, Victoria, and it will be remembered that it was Mrs. Fleming to whom the honour was given of performing the opening ceremony at the Scone Presbyterian Church. A family of 6 children survived the deceased, 4 sons and 2 daughters: John T. Fleming of Doreen, Weewa, Thomas H. Fleming of Russley and Kelvinside, and William M., for several years member of the Upper Hunter in the State Parliament and at present our member in the Federal Parliament, Frederick B. of Homely, Welcher, and for a number of years President of the Shire Council of his district and at President Secretary to the Shire's Conference, Mrs. L. C. Lewis of Yarul, Collarenebri, and Mrs. L. Leake of the Brigalow, Strathfield. His mortal remains were committed to earth beside those of his devoted wife on a spot near the homestead and overlooking the river and valley he loved so well. Thomas's father, Thomas Hasty Fleming, was born in Ballarat, Victoria in March 1870. On the 7th of July 1906, it announces the wedding of Mr. T. H. Fleming, the second son of Mr. J. R. Fleming of Kelvinside, Aberdeen, and Eular, Walgett, and Miss Naomi M. Langhorne of Oriel, Collarenebri, that was celebrated on the 5th of June at St. Stephen's Church, Phillip Street in Sydney. Naomi's grandfather, William Langhorne, emigrated from England by 1841, and he married Elizabeth Josephine Belcher in Melbourne in 1843. Naomi's father was Joseph William Cook Langhorne, who was born in Geelong, and in 1875 he was the overseer at Richardson's River in Victoria. Joseph William Cook Langhorne married Charlotte Marion Fries Fulton on the 28th of February 1885 at Port Sorrel in Tasmania. Charlotte had been born in India, where her father was a colonel in the Staff Corps and was commander of the HM 23rd Regiment of the Madras Light Infantry, and he brought his family to Tasmania. The death notice of Charlotte was announced in the paper. Pioneered in the West, death of Mrs. C.M.F. Langhorne. The recent death of Mrs. C.M.F. Langhorne at Oriel, Hull Road, Mossman, removes another one of the links of the chain, which was welded in the development of the outback. Mrs. Langhorne was a widow of the late Mr. J.W.C. Langhorne and was a granddaughter of Judge Waters, Chief Justice of the Madras Presidency in India, and daughter of Colonel Fulton, Commandant of Madras Infantry, who eventually brought his family to Tasmania and settled there. In 1885, she married Mr. J.W.C. Langhorne, who after leaving Geelong College gained experience in the livestock industry in Victoria. While droving sheep in Gingy Station near Walgett, he discovered the Yarrangobilly Caves. Later he managed Oriel Station near Collarenebri, New South Wales, a large property extending 40 miles from boundary to boundary, and at that time in a semi-improved state. The nearest doctor was 60 miles away at Walgett and the closest railway at Narrabri 90 miles away, from where all supplies had to be drawn by horse and bullock teams. In times of drought or flood, supplies might be a month on the journey. For very many years, Mr. and Mrs. Langhorne lived in that outback and reared a large family. Mr. Langhorne later bought Oriel and later still sold the property, after which the family made their home in Mossman. Naomi and Thomas Fleming had 5 children, and one of those was Thomas Fleming Jr., and he'd married Elizabeth Mackay at St. Peter's Church of England in Armidale, New South Wales on the 11th of May 1937. So how did events lead to the death of Betty Fleming? Well, a woman, Norma Lockable, accepted a position in country New South Wales. She'd answered an advertisement in the Newcastle and Morning Herald in April of that year using her maiden name Norma Rose. The advertisement reads, "Wanted, general help, all duties, £2 per week and keep. Will take woman with child of school age. Apply to Mrs. T. L. Fleming at Mount Parry, Willow Tree." Their property was 30 miles west of Willow Tree, and the nearest town of any size was Quirindi, which was 10 miles north of Willow Tree. So Norma Lockable applied for and accepted a position at Tom and Betty Fleming's property. Norma was born Norma Catherine Rose in 1922 in Newtown, New South Wales, and was 14 years younger than Tom Fleming. She'd been born to Claude Samuel Rose, a third-generation Australian, with his grandfather Thomas Rose immigrating from Wales to Newcastle, New South Wales and marrying in 1870. Thomas Rose's wife, Elizabeth Asquith, had a convict father and a free settler mother, both English. Norma Rose's mother was Elsie May Roberts, whose father was Josiah Roberts, known as C, who was born in Cornwall, England, and has links to King Charles, Winston Churchill and William the Conqueror. Josiah emigrated by 1891. He was a miner at Hill End when he married Emily Jane Ellis. Emily's grandfather was a convict whose surname was Hallis, but both grandparents changed their surnames to obtain position to marry, as he already had been married with children in England, so from that point on the surname was Ellis. Emily's father Thomas was also a miner at Tambaroora, New South Wales. Claude Rose and Elsie Roberts married on the 29th of April 1922 in Erskineville at the Church of the Holy Trinity, Church of England, and Norma was born that same year. Norma also had a younger sister, Elizabeth Marie Rose, who was born in January 1927. Norma Rose married Cornelius Marinus Lockable at Marrickville, New South Wales on the 20th of October 1943. Cornelius had been born in Holland in October 1918 and was 4 years older than Norma when they married. On the 24th of July 1948 in the Daily Telegraph, there was an article titled "Man Shot in Head." A Dutch engineer who has been 2 months in Australia was found critically wounded with a bullet hole in his head at Livingston Park, Marrickville last night. Police took possession of a revolver which was found lying near the wounded man. The engineer, Cornelius Marinus Lockable, 29, married, of Marrickville, was admitted to Marrickville Hospital, and he died the following day. A little more information about him was published, including the presumed reason behind his suicide. So from the Daily News in Perth, man who felt an outcast dies. A 29-year-old Dutchman who died in Marrickville Hospital today with a bullet wound in his head had felt himself an outcast in Sydney, police said. He was engineer Cornelius Marinus Lockable of Dulwich Hill, who'd been subject to fits of depression, and he was found wounded in Livingston Park, Marrickville at 8:45 p.m. yesterday with a revolver beside him. He'd recently come from Batavia. Presumably Lockable was a marine engineer. The report gave the impression that he was a recent migrant, but that is not the case. He'd arrived back in Sydney aboard the ship El Liberator on the 16th of May 1948. It certainly appeared that the young man was friendless in Sydney. The only death notice was inserted by his friend V.B. Glayweg Corbett, a fellow Dutchman from Perth. And it reads, Lockable, Cornelius Marinus, on the 24th of July at Marrickville Hospital, Sydney, fond friend of V.B. Glayweg Corbett, 41 Nelson Street, Inglewood. No funeral notice appeared for Cornelius. So what of his wife? No mention had been made of her in the news reports, and it turned out that Norma had left Cornelius the actual day that he shot himself. She left to go directly to Mount Parry Station and arrived at Mount Parry Station on the 24th of July, the day that the announcements were in the paper of her husband's death. Norma did receive a phone call at the station advising her of her husband's death, and it was not until several days later that she told the Flemings, confessing her real name was Norma Lockable, that she had a husband that suffered from war neurosis and had been very cruel to her. So it's quite possible he may have served in the Dutch Merchant Navy. She also said he'd threatened to shoot both her and himself, and she left as he said no one else could have her. Norma told her employers that after she left Sydney, Lockable went looking for her with a revolver and took his own life the same evening. She apologised for going to Mount Perry using her maiden name and left the property to settle her late husband's affairs. The Flemings were deeply shocked by the story and full of sympathy towards Norma, and Mrs. Fleming urged her to return, which she did within a week or so. Betty Fleming was preparing to give birth and was busy with her 3 boys. Thomas Fleming continued to offer support and sympathy to the attractive young widow. He took her on drives around the property, and almost inevitably a relationship developed between the attractive young widow and her wealthy employer. In the September, Mrs. Fleming gave birth to a daughter, Jennifer. Betty Fleming increasingly began to feel an outcast in her own home, and she certainly felt an outcast from her husband's affections. Outwardly, though, she was pleasant and cheerful, but privately she was in great distress. The situation at Mount Parry became intolerable for Norma Lockable too, particularly after her relationship with Tom Fleming became a sexual one. In mid-1950, Norma left Mount Parry and took a position in the accounts department of the Sydney GPO. There were never any harsh words between Betty Fleming and the woman who had become her rival. After she left, Norma sent Elizabeth Fleming some small gifts. She received a perfectly civil note of thanks from Betty. "Dear Miss Rose, just a note to thank you for the pretty things you sent me while you were on your holiday. It's a shame you had so much wet weather. I think Jennifer is going to have curly hair. The boys are well. Rich does not like school very much. A couple of days he has asked to stay at home. Mrs. Payne is well. Again thanking you, yours sincerely, Betty Fleming." Unfortunately, it was not the end of the relationship between Tom Fleming and Norma Lockable. A besotted Tom Fleming showered his lover with passionate letters and began to make frequent trips to Sydney, where Norma was living with her parents. Tom made promises that one day they would be together. A letter from Tom Fleming on the 7th of April 1951. "I feel miserable tonight, sweetheart, as I am very lonely for you and want you more and more each day, and won't be satisfied till we are together always. I received your wonderful letter today, sweetheart. It thrills me, daring, to hear you talk like that, as there is nothing in the world I want more, or even as much, as you." Given the difficulties of divorce in those days and the complications it would create for a husband and father, a future for the couple seemed highly unlikely. But a semi-detached house in working-class Hurlstone Park was vastly different to the splendours of Mount Parry Station, and like Fleming, Norma Lockable allowed herself to dream. There could never be a happy outcome to this situation, and in June 1951, Mount Parry Station would become the centre of a police investigation. A funeral service was held for Betty Fleming at the Presbyterian Church in Aberdeen, the home of both her mother and her sister Nancy Fleming, known as Nan, who was married to Tom Fleming's brother Joseph. Following the church service, the body was taken to Newcastle for a private cremation. Her heartbroken mother had questions for her son-in-law Tom, and so did police. They were all puzzled, as he could be unaware of his wife having died during the journey home along an often rough country road. Tests were carried out on the body to try to determine the cause of death. And on the 5th of July 1951 in the Sydney Daily Mirror, mystery death of woman. Police said today they were still uncertain whether 39-year-old Mrs. Elizabeth Fleming was murdered or committed suicide. The mother of 4 children died in a car whilst being driven home last Thursday by her husband to their sheep and cattle station at Mount Parry, 30 miles from Quirindi. The government analyst has reported that Mrs. Fleming died from cyanide poisoning. Detective Sergeant Aldridge of the CIB and Detective Clark of the Scientific Bureau were rushed to Willow Tree to assist Detective Moore of Tamworth. Police have learnt that on the day of the tragedy, Mrs. Fleming, her husband and her daughter Jennifer had been on a shopping trip to Quirindi. On that day, Mrs. Fleming had a glass of ale and later complained of feeling ill. Police have interviewed scores of persons in an effort to find a motive for the murder or a reason for suicide. They have not discounted entirely the possibility that Mrs. Fleming was accidentally poisoned. And on the 5th of July 1951 in the Bundaberg News Mail of Queensland, died after taking a glass of beer. Mrs. Fleming's organs and stomach contents were sent to the government analysis Dr. Taylor in Sydney. Detectives, meanwhile, had been sent to Tamworth to investigate the death. They intensified their inquiries today when they received the analyst's report that Mrs. Fleming had died from cyanide. Mrs. Fleming was a Miss Mackay and was the wife of Thomas Langhorne Fleming, wealthy cattle and sheep breeder. They have 3 sons and 1 daughter, aged 3, 6, 10 and 12. On Friday, July the 13th, Tom Fleming was arrested at Mount Parry and driven to Quirindi and formally charged. And a small newspaper article outlines this. In Sydney, Thomas Langhorne Fleming, 42, well-known breeder of stud cattle and sheep of Mount Parry, was charged at Quirindi Police Station at 1:55 p.m. today with the murder of his wife, Elizabeth Fleming, 39, on June the 28th. Betty and Tom Fleming had been prominent members of the community, and news of the arrest came as a huge shock. Soon Fleming would face a coronial inquiry where the intimate details of his affair with a former employee, Norma Lockable, would be aired and a decision made whether he should face trial for murder. So an article stated that there is now a clear motive, and Fleming was duly charged with the premeditated murder of his wife, poisoned by cyanide, probably administered in a glass of beer. Since Mrs. Fleming was unaware of her husband's infidelity, the possibility that she had taken her own life could not be dismissed. This would become the main argument for the defence. The chemist at Quirindi testified that Tom Fleming purchased 3/4 of a pound of cyanide on the 24th of July 1950. He said he used it to fumigate silos at Mount Parry. 5 days later, he disposed of the empty tin in a creek. If Betty Fleming planned to take her own life, she only had a brief window of opportunity to obtain some of the poison. In Tom Fleming's office, detectives found 3 minties which had been cut open and poisoned with cyanide. The sweets were discoloured and had obviously been there for some time. Did this indicate an experiment in preparation for premeditated murder? The only other possibility was that Betty Fleming did commit suicide and left the doctored minties to implicate her husband. Minties were found in several of her handbags. The fact that Mrs. Fleming visited her solicitor regarding her will on the day of her death was interpreted differently by the defence and prosecution. Was it an indication that she was about to take her own life? Or did her husband know about her appointment and seize an opportunity for murder, hoping it would be perceived as suicide? The fact that she did not sign the will that day and planned to do so later was a problem for the defence. An important argument against the theory of murder was that the odour and taste of cyanide, even in a bitter glass of beer, would make it almost impossible for someone to drink it unintentionally. At the inquest, Norma Lockable was called to give evidence about her relationship with Tom Fleming. There was no suggestion that she was in any way involved in Mrs. Fleming's death. Naturally, her presence created huge interest and she was hounded by the press both at Quirindi and Sydney. On the 2nd of August 1951 in the New South Wales Newcastle Sun, love letters read at Quirindi inquest. There were 3 letters published and 2 other letters couched in similar affectionate terms. Detective Aldridge said he read these letters to Fleming on the 13th of July before he was charged. After the first one had been read, Fleming said, "I wrote that a long time ago." After being charged, Fleming was shown the poisons book from R. Davies, a Quirindi chemist, and he admitted to have signed for the purchase of a quantity of cyanide. During long cross-examination by Mr. Shand, Detective Aldridge referred to the fact that on a trip from Willow Tree to Mount Parry on the 28th of June, the window of the car next to Mrs. Fleming was open, although she had the baby Jennifer on her lap. Detective Aldridge added, "I consider that would have been the action of a man in a panic, leaving the window half open and a cold wind and sleet blowing on a child of 3. Later, referring to an alleged statement by Fleming that his wife was driving the children away from him, Detective Aldridge said it would be an incentive for a man so infatuated with a woman as he was, if he did not wish to lose his children and still wanted the other woman, to do away with his wife. Referring to the letter on February the 17th, Detective Aldridge said that Fleming told him he took it as a suicide note because Aldridge allegedly remarked to him, "That is the end of it," after reading the letter. He told the court, "I did say that, but after reading it I changed my mind. It was not a suicide note." Detective Aldridge produced an alleged statement made by Fleming on the 4th of July in which he denied there had been words with Mrs. Fleming over his association with Miss Rose. He said their association was all above board. He'd been in Sydney from the 18th of June to the 26th of June and had lunched almost every day with Miss Rose, and on Sunday they'd driven to Stanwell Park and lunched at a roadside cafe. Fleming also allegedly stated that Bet knew I saw her and said that Mrs. Fleming knew Miss Rose wrote to him. He admitted Miss Rose was his closest female friend outside the family, but added, "I want to add that I know a lot of women, and on thinking things over, Miss Rose was no more to me than a lot of other women I know. She's been like a sister to me." Asked whether there'd been any estrangement over Miss Rose, Fleming allegedly replied, "Well, there was a bit of an estrangement about 18 months ago. It was before Miss Rose left, actually. It was because of that she left, and my wife and I patched up things together." Referring to the letter on the 17th of February, Detective Aldridge said he did not believe Mrs. Fleming would commit suicide and thereby permit what she wanted to avoid, having the other woman care for her children. Detective Aldridge produced a transcript of shorthand notes of alleged conversations with Fleming on the 13th of July, in which Fleming said he had nothing to hide, that his name was reputable and truth and honesty was his best policy. Detective Aldridge allegedly said, "You say Miss Rose is like a sister to you. Did you ever mention marriage to her?" And he claimed that Fleming replied that Miss Rose had refused marriage because it would mean a separation from his wife. Fleming allegedly said he had told Miss Rose he intended to divorce his wife, but he did not know on what grounds because Bet was the best wife and mother in the world. He allegedly added that Mrs. Fleming had said she would never divorce him. Fleming allegedly said he discussed divorce with his wife when he told her about Miss Rose, and also told her he thought she was driving the children away from him. He allegedly added, "I was not happy." And on the 4th of August 1951 in the Melbourne Argus, woman in case. Last night's picture of Miss Rose, Mrs. Norma Lockable, central figure in their sensational Corindy Grazier's wife inquest. Mrs. Lockable gave her evidence with no sign of nervousness. Although she was in the witness box for nearly 2 hours, she did not once look at Thomas Fleming, the grazier that has been charged with the murder of his wife. She told the court of her intimate friendship with Fleming, which began when she was employed on his station property in Mount Parry. She had been known as Miss Rose, she said, since her husband, who was suffering from war neurosis, committed suicide in 1948. And on the 9th of August 1951, in the Uralla Times, the coronial finding. The coroner found that Betty Fleming died in a car on the 28th of June from the effects of cyanide poison, willfully administered by her husband. He further found that Fleming had feloniously murdered his wife, and he committed Fleming for trial at Tamworth on the 28th of August. At the trial, the Crown argued that although Betty Fleming was unhappy about her husband's infidelity, she had much to live for and had been planning pleasurable activities in the near future. Certainly Mrs. Fleming's diaries show great distress over her husband's behaviour, but also joy in her 4 children, especially her baby Jennifer. Some of the diary entries in 1951, on the 3rd of June, she wrote, "Another dreadful day. Feel so lonely and sad. Dear little Jen seems to give me more love and affection, or do I imagine it? Tom admits friends in Sydney and pleasures." 4th of June, just long for boys to be home from school. Tom out all afternoon, mail again and writing tonight. I wish he would tell me the truth. He hardly speaks. The 5th of June, hardly any sleep and feeling awful. If only he would give me a few kind and civil words. 7th of June, another awful day. I realise how final and terrible this is and what a stupid, senseless fool I've been. I would undo all if I could. 8th of June, 1 week of tearful, awful loneliness. 9th of June, my heart is like a lump of lead. Terrible, awful loneliness. Children are just wonderful. I adore them. 13th of June, must do something. I am sure all is hopeless. I feel so lonely. It was not in Betty Fleming's nature to share her problems, even with close friends and family, and the diary appeared to be a safety valve so she could express her unhappiness. How terrible, though, that her privacy was invaded after her death and used by the defence team. It was suggested that she was depressed because she was menopausal and that she was mentally unstable. During the period between June 1950 and July 1951, Tom Fleming wrote 99 letters to Norma Lockable. Extracts from Tom Fleming's letters to Norma. July 17th, 1950. You will always be a happy memory to me, darling. I hope more than a memory before too long. 19th of July 1950. Some mornings have been quite cold early and I found myself wishing it was you I was pulling closer to me and cuddling. I am now waiting for that day again. 21st of July 1950. I felt well and truly down in the dumps and wish you were here with me to cheer me up as I am lost without you, dear. 24th of July 1950. I am downhearted because I'm not with you. I am like a lamb without its mother and longing to be with you. I miss you, darling, more than words can explain. In other letters he spoke of a future honeymoon and buying his beloved a trousseau. Such talk was foolish in the extreme, considering there was no likelihood of a divorce. His barrister suggested that Fleming was not very intelligent. Another unposted letter became important in the case as it was written by Betty Fleming to her sister Nan, who was married to Tom's brother Joseph, and it was dated on the 17th of February 1951. Dearest Nan, if I should die before my children grow up, will you, if it is in your power, see that a certain person, Mrs. Norma Lockable, known to our household as Miss Rose, has nothing to do with the bringing up of my children? Betty Fleming's GP testified that in November 1950 she'd consulted him regarding lumps in her breast. He reassured her they were not cancer-related. However, the Crown contended that she may have still been worried. They suggested that appeal to her sister was not a signal of impending suicide, but a sad acknowledgement that Norma Lockable was waiting in the wings to take her place if she should die. In part 2, I'll be covering the questioning that was directed particularly to Thomas Fleming in the trial and the outcome of the trial. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.